Recording. All right, James, welcome. We've been trying to set this up for a while now. So we have an update on MicroStrategy and some other things we want to talk about. And I guess we can do sort of a quick rundown of the charts, since we did one, there's crazy things over the weekend, and I did one yesterday, and certainly things have bounced quite a bit since then. So there's some stuff we can follow up on. But this has been a long time coming. I'm excited to do this, and looking forward to what we have today. So I guess with that said,
it's definitely been a long time coming, because some of you who might have seen some of our episodes before will have seen I think we did like 2 episodes on MicroStrategy before, where we were kind of like, the question was put out there over what would happen with MicroStrategy if the Bitcoin ETFs get approved. We're talking, it was over a year ago that we were doing this now. And like, we did a bit of digging into it and a bit of investigation. We found like a really good way of kind of like valuing MicroStrategy and what drives the price action of MicroStrategy. And basically, I came to the conclusion that there might be a short-term effect while like people go into the Bitcoin ETFs instead, but ultimately in the long term, I didn't see the fundamental case for MicroStrategy changing that much. Now, since then, we've had like MicroStrategy like rocketing off. I think I was wrong on the short-term effect. I don't think there was even like a short-term change in what was happening with MicroStrategy. I think it was just going bananas straight off the bat and acting like MicroStrategy always did. But then like during that time, that would have been the perfect time for an update. But unfortunately, inconsiderately, you were having like surgeries and recoveries at the time, so we never got round to it. And then by the time you recovered, it was then kind of like, oh, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. So we finally got around to it, but better late than never.
Right. I remember all that now. It's all coming back. Yeah. And I've been, we touched on a MicroStrategy chart, I think in my show, either 1 or 2 shows ago recently. And yeah, it's been booming. It's been crazy. And it's like it had no impact from the ETFs at all.
No.
So yeah, that was super interesting. Do you want to share a chart or?
Yeah, I mean, let's kind of go straight into it. So I'll share I'll share my screen, and we'll like kind of go into a little bit into the background of what we were a little bit of a recap in terms of like what we were debating and what we were discussing about at the time. So first of all, we were kind of like overlaying Bitcoin and MicroStrategy on the same chart and over each other, and I've zoomed in on kind of like the time period that we were looking at as well. Obviously, we've got, this chart isn't fully up to date yet, but we were essentially looking at this going, okay, MicroStrategy kind of, this is the main like kind of talking point. Like MicroStrategy kind of looks like it acts like Bitcoin on leverage on the way up, and then again it kind of acts like Bitcoin on leverage on the way down, but not completely. There are times when MicroStrategy here was kind of like going up, but Bitcoin was coming down, so it didn't quite fit with each other essentially. And so it was like, okay, so it kind of acts this way, but not fully. And actually, if we zoom out, and we're really measuring this from kind of like from 2020, when it was around about here when MicroStrategy first started buying Bitcoin. And obviously, as we know since then, like MicroStrategy, if you see the difference between MicroStrategy, like it shot up away from Bitcoin and then like came back down to sort of similar sorts of levels. It then underperformed during this whole period, and then it's just shot up since then. So like from this date, wherever it is, March 2020, actually it should be a little bit further along than that. I think it's around about here. Obviously big difference at the moment. Like Bitcoin has gone up 750% since then, but MicroStrategy has gone up 1,173%. What was the big sort of unlock and being like the big ding aha moment was this chart. So this was the chart that I put together, and actually I'm going to zoom in on this one a little bit as well, to kind of like cut out the recent big sort of bull run that MicroStrategy's been doing. This was pricing MicroStrategy in Bitcoin. So we've taken the MicroStrategy price in dollars, put it over the Bitcoin price in dollars. The $2 cancel each other out, and you've now got basically what is MicroStrategy's price in Bitcoin terms, not in dollar terms. And then what was the other big ding ding aha moment was kind of like adding in all of the times when MicroStrategy has accumulated Bitcoin. So here you can see like I've added in the dates when they've added Bitcoin and the numbers as well. So like right here in the very first buy, which was 11th of August, they announced that they were going to like buy, I think it was 20,000 or something Bitcoin. The TradingView logo's in the way. 20,000 and boom, like, you know, and if we zoom out even further, you know, this is a long period where the MicroStrategy price, as with a lot of other stocks, were just falling and falling and falling and falling and falling against Bitcoin over time. And then suddenly since MicroStrategy started accumulating Bitcoin, this might look volatile against the Bitcoin price, and it kind of is. But when you zoom out and look at like before MicroStrategy, pre-accumulating Bitcoin, and afterwards, it's actually much more stable. And MicroStrategy is appreciating in price along with Bitcoin when its Bitcoin holdings are going up in value. So that was kind of like, again, another ding 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 moment for me. And it made me much more comfortable to hold MicroStrategy as well, because personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Michael Saylor. Like, I don't really listen to what he says on YouTube. I'm kind of just like, yeah, whatever, in terms of the whole thing. But in terms of investing into MicroStrategy as a company, I became much more comfortable with it when I kind of like understood a few of these things. Essentially, what it came to is kind of like when, and these are not all of the accumulations. These are basically all of the accumulations every time they've bought over 1,000 Bitcoin. So these are like, you know, the big numbers that we're talking about. Essentially, the general rule of thumb is when they buy like a large amount of Bitcoin. So here they like bought 30,000 Bitcoin. Eventually, like that was its big sort of run up against Bitcoin, and eventually, like it will outperform Bitcoin. And as you know, the net asset value raced ahead of the stock price. The stock price catches up. The stock price then goes ahead, and then it comes back down to earth. And there were a lot of accumulations in the early days, but then as the bull market came to an end and crypto winter started setting in, MicroStrategy might have outperformed on the upside, but it then started massively underperforming on the downside. And it started, this is kind of like its break-even price. This is the day when MicroStrategy first bought Bitcoin. And when a company is accumulating Bitcoin, you would kind of expect the company to like go up and to the right versus Bitcoin, but that's not what happened with MicroStrategy. It went up on the way up and down on the way down, and that's because MicroStrategy were not just buying Bitcoin with revenue money, with its earnings and profits and all that kind of stuff. It also bought it on leverage, and that leverage meant that there was a bigger risk than Bitcoin. So when Bitcoin was going down, then MicroStrategy went down, and it went down a lot. Like there was it's easy to kind of forget now, but MicroStrategy did come pretty close to getting margin called on you know, the big losses at its time on its Bitcoin holdings. Now it didn't, and we're going to come to kind of like what's happened since then. But essentially, it's kind of mainly stayed above this break-even line in terms of the Bitcoin price, but it's kind of traded around it. And so it kind of stayed stable around here for a while. And the number of accumulations, like the accumulations stopped while things were crashing down, all that kind of stuff. There was even a point here where they had to sell a bunch of Bitcoin for whatever reason that was. And they didn't like that. It went down, and then it sort of like bounced back up again, continued trading around it, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, the sort of the summary I got was that like MicroStrategy sometimes acts like Bitcoin on leverage. Like when Bitcoin is going down, then MicroStrategy does underperform because MicroStrategy, because of that leverage, has had the bigger risk. So during the bear market, pretty much MicroStrategy always performs like Bitcoin on leverage. During a sideways market, when Bitcoin is kind of like not doing much or whatever, in the times when MicroStrategy is accumulating, its net asset value goes up, and so the shares go up in price against Bitcoin. When it's a bull run and Bitcoin is going up, MicroStrategy sometimes acts like Bitcoin on leverage. So there were times when kind of like MicroStrategy was sort of falling behind a bit, I put that down to the Bitcoin price like racing ahead of MicroStrategy. But given what's happened since then, I'm actually not sure that that was the case. I think it was just, Bitcoin was mainly getting the attention, and then people realized, oh crap, actually MicroStrategy is really good for this as well, and then kind of ape into that. So that's kind of a bit of the recap for our analysis and where that took us to. And essentially, this is why I didn't see anything changing with the Bitcoin ETF, because net asset value is the net asset value. Like if it's Bitcoin, if MicroStrategy's market cap is 8 billion and the net asset value is 10 billion, people will buy that because the shares are cheap compared to its holdings. The other way to think about it is that your MicroStrategy shares are accumulating Bitcoin. They're accumulating Bitcoin because of the revenues that come in that go into buying Bitcoin. They're also accumulating Bitcoin through the leverage as well. So you have MicroStrategy shares used to be worth X number of Bitcoin, and then that number of Bitcoin that it's a proxy for would grow and grow and grow. So actually, MicroStrategy should outperform the net asset value because you're expecting your Bitcoin holdings of your MicroStrategy shares to be growing over time. So it should outperform on the way up, but then because of the leverage, it would underperform on the way down. So the Bitcoin ETFs, I didn't really see us changing that. And yeah, like I said, I thought that there might have been a short-term change as like kind of people didn't really need to use MicroStrategy as kind of like the proxy anymore. But
Right.
no, there wasn't even a short-term change. It just kind of like carried on with a plum. So we're going to zoom out again and we're going to go all the way to the present day.
It's just like a super highly correlated higher beta version of Bitcoin.
Yeah. So as we can see, like I said, the accumulations kind of like slowed down, and there was this big period here where there was no accumulations at all. Then they start kind of happening, like you got 2,000 here, sold a bit there, 6,000 here, 1,000 there. The first sort of like really big one, which kind of like kicked things off, is this 12,000 here. Buying 12,000 Bitcoin here. This is kind of like the start of the next cycle of Bitcoin, because I don't think MicroStrategy still has done a full 4-year cycle yet. Actually no, it might be any day now as kind of like the anniversary.
Yeah, I want to say I think it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's literally a few days time, like 5 days time from now. That will be MicroStrategy's kind of like 4-year cycle,
right.
first 4 years with Bitcoin. But yeah, so you had this. Oh, what did I just do there? Let me click undo a second. I've just zoomed out a little bit. So yeah, you've got this kind of like this 12,000 buy here, and then another big buy a short while later, and that rocketed the MicroStrategy price. It kind of like stabilized a bit, but then we had another few big buys here, and I think what happened here was there was a short squeeze. There were some hedge funds that wanted to kind of like short MicroStrategy. They saw it as overvalued and stuff, and basically they ended up getting squeezed out, and that caused this big, huge run up here. What was interesting is that I looked at this level where MicroStrategy priced in Bitcoin kind of peaked, and it's basically the similar sort of like level that it reached here all the way before. So that was kind of like very, very interesting. And you can see that it's done it since then. So it like, it peaked there, came back down to earth, rose again, another big accumulation here, rose again, sort of like peaked. It didn't quite reach these heights up here, but it's still the similar sort of area. Now, what's going to be the interesting questions moving forward is, are we going to see MicroStrategy start going up and to the right with Bitcoin? Now, it's still going to be volatile. It's not going to be going up in a nice steady line like that. It's going to like trade all over the place during that. But are we going to still be trading around this level here from day one? I don't think so. I think that things have changed for a few reasons, and you followers on MicroStrategy will know what I'm going to come on to. But that whole idea of your MicroStrategy shares are accumulating Bitcoin, that was done through revenues and through profits, but also through the leverage. The leverage has been carrying on. So a lot of these Bitcoin have been bought with borrowed money. So your shares of MicroStrategy are accumulating Bitcoin once again. However, the terms of that debt are a lot more kind of lenient than the terms of the debt before. So
Okay.
So I think that while MicroStrategy might well underperform Bitcoin again, I don't see it as being as big of an underperformance as last cycle because it's not as risky. The leverage is not as risky. And the other thing to add on top of that is when MicroStrategy would kind of like get overvalued compared to its net asset value, Michael Saylor would issue stock to buy more Bitcoin. Now, issuing the stock to buy more Bitcoin doesn't really increase the number of Bitcoin for your individual shares, but what it does do is spread the risk. So if we just take an example, like, say MicroStrategy has $5 billion of debt liability, and that's spread across a portfolio of 150,000 Bitcoin. Michael Saylor then issues stock to buy another 50,000 Bitcoin. The company still has that $5 billion debt liability, but it's now spread across 200,000 Bitcoin instead of 150,000. So it's spreading the risk. So not only is the leverage on more lenient terms, but the risk is now spread across a much bigger portfolio, a much wider portfolio than before as well. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how MicroStrategy develops moving forward, and it only improves. The case for MicroStrategy as a good investment. If you're into Bitcoin, essentially. So I don't know what you think to that. Any thoughts to that?
I'm super curious. I want to see what this chart looks like on a logarithmic scale.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity. Oh, it's okay. It's not much different at all. Okay.
Not much different. That's kind of the logarithmic scale when I've zoomed right out. Remember that point before we made before of like
okay, so that was
again, it's still I need to stop doing that. I need to click undo again.
No, I hate it when I do that too.
Yeah, so essentially it doesn't look as drastic as under appreciation compared to Bitcoin, but it still underlines the point that it kind of stabilized around here and is now gaining against Bitcoin once again.
So if you'd have bought MicroStrategy stock way back at the beginning, you'd still be pretty upside down in Bitcoin value, basically. Did you draw that conclusion?
You're talking about, so like if you bought MicroStrategy way back here in 2017, you'd still be like a massive loss compared to Bitcoin.
Although but by that point they weren't buying Bitcoin, so that almost doesn't count.
No.
Like that's
no.
Like you would have only gotten into it.
Yeah, be fair, Kris. Be fair. We're only looking at this period here after they started buying.
You could argue that them buying Bitcoin is probably what saved that stock.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't really that exciting a company before.
Right.
So it probably would have just carried on. The other thing to note is that MicroStrategy is also pivoting as a business. They're now going towards focusing on being a Bitcoin focused business that is going to kind of like develop various Bitcoin ventures or all that kind of stuff, rather than being a kind of like just a generic software company. So that's another pivot that they're going to do, and that's going to how they want to generate their business in future. We'll see how that goes. Again, I'm kind of like not really following that too closely, because it's pretty much it's all about the net asset value. How much Bitcoin do they have? How much are they accumulating? Blah 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 blah. The other thing that will kind of like to bear in mind is, yes, the terms of the debt are much more generous than before, but that's still debt that will have to be paid back off at some point. And what is going to be the strategy for that? This is the kind of like Michael Saylor point again, because Michael Saylor is kind of like, seems as if he's in the camp of like, I will never sell any Bitcoin. And it's like, well, your Bitcoin have hugely appreciated. Are you going to like even sell just like a little bit off to just pay back some of the debt? Because even if you're giving debt to MicroStrategy on very generous terms, that's still debt that you kind of expect to be paid back at some point. So how's that going to work? Is it going to come from revenues? Is it going to come from like selling just little bits out of its portfolio? I don't know. That'll be something to find out.
So yeah, I guess the question comes up: what percentage of their Bitcoin holdings comes from borrowed money? I wonder. Do you know?
That's a good question. I actually don't know that. That's probably something
Okay.
that I should be on top of. So yeah, that'll probably be a question to kind of like do an addendum when we post this video.
And then the most recent buy was when? Because
So
I thought I read recently that they bought more or were getting ready to buy more or issuing stock to buy more or whatever. But
yeah,
maybe that already happened.
so I add in the lines, I add in the accumulations. Basically when so there's a really good website that I follow where it kind of like tracks the holdings, and basically when the Bitcoin goes into the wallet, essentially that's when
Okay.
that's basically the date for the line and stuff. So there will be some kind of like price action around it of like announcing that they're going to buy another tranche of Bitcoin, blah 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 blah. But basically I'm kind of like just keeping to when do they actually get the Bitcoin. That's when I mark it on here. So but again, it does drive, there is more price action driven by that kind of stuff, by the announcements, by the news.
Got it. Okay. I'm just kind of looking to, so I wanted to see if the bigger buys result in bigger price spikes, but it looks like, well, at least partway through last year, like in the May, that area, those are like 10 plus thousand each, aren't they? There's two there. And it didn't quite pump as much as some of the other ones.
So it basically, it was just languishing around here, and then
Okay.
that 12,000 buy, that got kicked off. That's
Right.
what kicked it off. So yeah, that's what kind of like started it off. And again, it's not, there's nothing to be sniffed at either. Like if we measure, so that was like a
Yeah. No.
50%. That's a 50% appreciation against Bitcoin.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it might look small when you zoom out and stuff, but it's not something to be sniffed at either.
No, definitely not.
So yeah, let me just get rid of that. So yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at the moment. Obviously I bought my MicroStrategy like a good while back, and it's done sort of like really, really well since then. But there's some interesting things to watch out for, essentially. So like, hang on, if we, so when you kind of like understand what drives the price action of Bitcoin, and also have a look at kind of like the historical price action and stuff. If you've bought MicroStrategy like around about here, and you're watching the price against Bitcoin, and you see it come up against here, and you see that it's kind of like similar to that level, then we're starting to see signals. We're starting to develop these things that can maybe be used going forwards. Again, when like kind of for the peak here. I know that James from Investor Answers has kind of like a good strategy that's kind of like worked well for kind of like swapping between the two and stuff. I think it'll be partly based on things like this. So again, I'm kind of like just holding it because in the UK we don't really have kind of like accounts where you can swap directly between the two, which is a bit of a shame. If there was kind of like a actually I need to, maybe it's been a while since I last looked. If there's like a MicroStrategy stock on chain, as a crypto token, then that can be something that I can play with. But until then, I kind of just have to, like have it as my part of my separate traditional finance portfolio that I'm just hacking as a crypto proxy, essentially.
Right. Right. Which it works great for. I think
Yeah.
I mean, clearly it's actually the better play so far this cycle, really, as we've talked about.
And as I said, I think it will probably remain the better play moving forwards. Obviously, like I'm going to be selling everything next year sometime. When will kind of like is to be determined. I'm still like kind of like figuring out my selling strategy. I've got a year to sort it out, essentially. But yeah, I'm going to be coming out completely, because then at that point, that's when I expect MicroStrategy to underperform Bitcoin on the way down, but it won't matter because I'll be out. So that's kind of like how I'm thinking of it. The other thing, so I think there was a question put on the Discord. This is a Discord server that both of us are in, and there was a question put in terms of if Bitcoin gets adopted as a strategic reserve asset in the USA. I know that there's kind of like noise coming out about that in the Trump camp and all that kind of stuff. And if companies start adopting Bitcoin as kind of like a reserve asset for their books as well, will that kind of like take the shine off MicroStrategy? And will that, it's kind of a similar question to the Bitcoin ETFs. When you're given kind of like alternatives, will that kind of like take away market share from MicroStrategy and affect it moving forwards? I kind of think no, because there are other companies today. We know that Tesla has holdings in Bitcoin. We know that some of the the big tech companies like Microsoft and Apple and all that kind of stuff, they have some Bitcoin. But ultimately, that's not really what drives their price. It very much depends on and that there's been another company, like I think it was like a biotech company, SMLR is the ticker, where they kind of like announced, kind of like all companies have been announcing an AI strategy. They've announced a Bitcoin strategy and they got a big, boost in the short-term stock price off the back of it. But it's kind of like come to nothing because ultimately it's not been that big. It's not been that much. It's like,
Right.
When smartphones were the really, really, really big trend, like there were multiple phone companies and all that kind of stuff. But who was the big winner? Apple. What would most people have invested in? Apple? It's just because they were selling the most phones, they were the best ones, they were making the most money. So unless there's another company that becomes a direct competitor to MicroStrategy in being a balls to the wall, we are going to accumulate as much Bitcoin as we possibly can, as fast as we can, all that kind of stuff, I don't really see how more companies coming into the Bitcoin space is going to affect MicroStrategy, because I don't really see other companies doing what MicroStrategy does.
No, I think if anything, it would be a plus for MicroStrategy, because you got to figure, like you said, all of these other companies, they're just going to add what, 1, 5, 10%, maybe tops to their corporate treasury balance. If anything, it'll create a cumulative effect. It'll create scarcity for the entire Bitcoin market. But they're not doing what MicroStrategy is doing. And so MicroStrategy is just going to benefit from that scarcity and that price appreciation and be better off still, even.
Exactly. Really, really good point. So essentially, a lot of those players coming into the space, especially with the new accounting rules, blah 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 blah, that's going to pump MicroStrategy's bags, and then because MicroStrategy are more likely going to buy more Bitcoin than any other company out there, they're going to race ahead. So yeah, like I think that MicroStrategy is probably going to be just fine as an investment moving forward. I've certainly, again, it's one of those things where I'm not Michael Saylor's biggest fan, but the more I find out about the company and the dynamics and what they're doing and all that and how it works, the more comfortable I am holding it. So yeah.
Yeah. And then I think in terms of like governments, adding to their strategic reserves or whatever, same thing. I mean, you can't invest or get investment exposure to a government, Bitcoin holding. So in that sense, it's going to be the same as all of these other smaller corporations. It's just going to further reduce the supply, even more so, and pump the bags. Exactly. So all of that I think is super positive for MicroStrategy. Should it happen. I'm a little skeptical on governments actually doing this, at least in the near term, but I can see, as we've seen already, corporations adopting it on a smaller scale, and it only helps. So
yeah, I mean, I've put my thoughts on the Discord about this and stuff, and my immediate question to like, Trump's going to adopt it as a Bitcoin reserve. I was like, yeah, how much? Because immediately I was thinking they're just gonna. The U.S. government holds about 200,000 Bitcoin at the moment, and if they say our strategic reserve is going to be 200,000 Bitcoin, then that's such the cynical, typical, just bog standard politician going, we can get a lot of votes from this and we don't even have to spend a cent because we've already got the Bitcoin. And then we're still going to be like accumulating slowly over time because like, criminals are going to criminal and we're going to like confiscate Bitcoin from them or whatever. Again, like we're not really spending money. I mean, we're spending money technically on the criminal investigations and the confiscations and all that kind of stuff, but that's money we were spending anyway. All we're doing is just not selling the Bitcoin anymore. So I kind of saw it as like a cheap, cynical ploy to get the crypto votes. But again, we do not want to get into too much politics or whatever. We'll just leave it there, as say.
I feel like, yeah, no, and all that, of course, fair point. Like I said, I do think that while all of this sounds interesting and intriguing, I still think it's a ways out if it happens at all. I don't think it's going to happen, obviously, before the election. Certainly, the outcome of the election will have a huge say in if that happens or not, or when, and things like that. So, yeah, if anything, I would almost be not surprised to see other nation states adopting a strategic reserve before the U.S. actually gets around to it, above and beyond what they already have in their supply.
Well, yeah, especially smaller countries that are probably kind of like more nimble and can make the decision quicker. But
exactly.
all it did actually was kind of like strike home to me that the US government has 1% of all the Bitcoin. Going back to the 21 million, the US government has essentially 1% of that.
Right.
Do I want the US government adding to that? And do I want the US government eventually getting 5%, 10% of the total Bitcoin supply? Actually, no. I'd rather not. It's kind of like I'm already kind of like a little bit uncomfortable because so much Bitcoin supply is held by those early whales, and they have such power over the market, and we're essentially putting a lot of trust in those guys. And I'm a little bit squeamish at the US government being added to that, to those people that kind of like we have to really trust to not rug us at any time.
I trust those OG Bitcoin whales way more than I do any of these governments. I don't want the likes of the US and Russia and China and everybody coming in and making the crypto space their sort of battleground, and we're all just sort of caught up in the middle of this. I feel like that it's very much a double-edged sword to have these large nation states adopting this.
Because he's even on like the kind of the perfect hypothetical where, like, say if Trump wins and he plays an absolute blinder with the US strategic reserve, who wins after Trump? Or even if it's not in 2028, who wins the election in 2032, 2036, 2040? Like, at some point there might come a bunch of buffoons into the Oval Office that either if there's kind of like an anti-crypto movement or whatever, we don't know what happens in the future. And for the US government to have like a big supply of that, I'm kind of like,
yeah, absolutely. It makes me nervous too. Initially, I was like, yeah, because major FOMO, price is gonna shoot to $1 million, and it's like, yes, possibly, but also be careful what you wish for, because with that could come all kinds of nightmare scenarios.
Yes, be very careful what you wish for. But again, enough of politics. No more politics.
Well, this is super interesting. Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared this. I've been looking at MicroStrategy too, a little bit differently, but it's actually here. Let's share my screen.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Yeah,
real quick. I have let's see. Okay, so I want to look. I've got a MicroStrategy. I think it's this one. Yeah. Hold on. Let me clean this up. What I was looking at the other day.
MicroStrategy Solana. Oh.
Well, okay. I mean, we can take a look at that real quick. So, yeah, no. I mean, it's down a little bit, but still, it's well, since the beginning of the year anyway. It's outpacing Solana too.
Wow. Really?
Oh, no, this is Bitcoin. No, I'm sorry, this is Bitcoin. I was on the wrong. Jeez. Okay. What do we got here?
Okay, so there's a bit more of a tough fight between the two.
It is, yeah. They're certainly. I mean, clearly, MicroStrategy is still the better play, at least since year to date. I mean, I don't know. If you go back to the beginning of the cycle, it's actually still up a fair bit. It went way down in Q4 of last year.
Big monster run that Solana did, yeah.
Yeah. But then it's sort of recouped a lot of that, and it's back up. So, and like I said, if you had bought at the beginning of the cycle, you'd be up even still with MicroStrategy over Solana, which is amazing because Solana is up a lot, over the year, over the course of the cycle. So, really impressive, honestly. And And then I had looked at kind of just, let me get rid of this one and look at these two.
So you've literally like put like Bollinger Bands and moving averages and support bands and stuff in on
Yeah,
the
just kind of
MicroStrategy price in Bitcoin.
Yeah, just sort of my default setup that I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny the two on their own. So MicroStrategy just by itself, and then in US BTC rather denominated, the chart structure is nearly identical.
Pretty similar, yeah.
Yeah. I think the scale is a little bit more on just MicroStrategy by itself. But yeah, it's super interesting. The point being how well it tracks it, how highly correlated it is, which I mean makes sense, but it's just to sort of look at it visually, it's actually pretty striking, how correlated they really are.
So
yeah,
it's kind of like, not to say that MicroStrategy is Bitcoin on leverage after all, but kind of like Bitcoin is a muted MicroStrategy.
Yeah, or like the opposite of what I said earlier, how it's just a highly correlated higher beta play of Bitcoin. It goes up more and it goes down more, but it tracks it. I mean, almost exactly, basically. Yeah, super interesting though. And the Solana pair, I was really surprised to see that too. I was like, okay, that's cool. MicroStrategy is outpacing Bitcoin, but how's it doing against the actual sort of class benchmark of the cycle being Solana? Yeah. And even in that sense, it's outpacing Solana thus far this cycle too. So, jokes on us, and you're you're outpacing probably the lion's share of us by being weighted in this MicroStrategy versus Solana or Bitcoin directly.
Well, I mean, like, we were on that episode together where like I showed my portfolio pie essentially, and I was like 35% Sol, and I was about 20%, 16% MicroStrategy. Like the MicroStrategy was kind of like in my traditional portfolios where I can't do crypto directly. I basically did a heavy weighting towards Coinbase, and then my second largest holding was the MicroStrategy, because at the time I was like, I'm pretty okay with the MicroStrategy, but I'm still a bit meh over it. But then it was like after doing the investigating, all that kind of stuff, I was like, oh, actually, MicroStrategy ended up being kind of the better play. They still pull Coinbase and MicroStrategy have still over time pulled similar numbers, but I think MicroStrategy is in the lead at the moment.
I think you're right, if I'm not mistaken. I think I have Coinbase here, CoinStock. Let's see, I got Solana, Bitcoin. I was looking at this real quick. So this is Coinbase for Solana. So Coinbase is not, we can infer already, given that Coinbase is not outpacing Solana, that it's also certainly not outpacing MicroStrategy either. You could imagine. So yeah. Let's actually do a
I think that Coinbase, unlike MicroStrategy, where it's basically just all about the net asset value and stuff, I think Coinbase is kind of like suffering more recently from kind of more traditional company fundamentals. So in terms of revenues and all that kind of stuff, then kind of like needs to be that sort of big bull run pickup of retail trading a whole lot more to generate that huge glut of fees, and that's really going to send like Coinbase flying. Oh yeah, okay. So it's kind of like chopped around, but actually the general trend is downwards over time. So I weighted more heavily towards the slower horse, but overall I'm happy. I can't have too many regrets.
Well, no, and we both know that Coinbase is still outpacing Bitcoin. So even though it's not holding ground with MicroStrategy, it's still better than Bitcoin. So you're still winning, I guess, even if you're not losing. But
oh yeah,
you're still winning even if you're losing. But yeah, no,
absolutely.
Interesting. Okay, well, yeah, I like your strategy. I mean, I think you've got a good thing going there with your diversity, with holding both stocks and crypto, and
that's not really that's kind of like not really a choice, because we can't hold this is you being UK specific. We can't hold. This is interesting actually, because like if I'd been given the choice, I probably would have maybe done some Coinbase or whatever, but I would have probably just done Bitcoin ETFs if I'd had that choice. But
Sure.
actually, because I didn't have that choice, I've ended up going more heavily into Coinbase and MicroStrategy, and actually I've ended up outperforming what I otherwise would have done. So so actually, you know, that's something that I can take forward into future cycles, even if like I suddenly have access to the Bitcoin ETFs, Ethereum ETFs, all that kind of stuff. I might look at it and go, actually, I still want to put plenty into Coinbase and MicroStrategy, and probably have those as kind of like the main positions rather than the direct ETFs. Maybe again, that'll be something to decide on in future things and stuff. The Solana ETF, now that would be a toss up in terms of like where I'd go with that, but it'll be nice to have the choice. But yeah, essentially, like I don't really have the option. So I essentially I have my ISAs, and you know I can only put a certain amount of money into that each and every year. Of that, it basically just goes into Coinbase, MicroStrategy, a few sprinklings of miners and stuff. Everything else is in crypto directly, essentially.
Do you think, looking back, if you would have, say, hypothetically, you would have had complete freedom to buy direct crypto and store it in a pension retirement account or whatever, a tax sheltered account like we can here in the US, would you have just gone fully into crypto directly, or do you think you still would have looked at MicroStrategy, Coinbase, etc.?
I think I still would have looked at them. I think I still would have taken some positions in them, but like maybe like small sprinklings of them, of being like, you know, it'll be nice to own a few of their companies and stuff and like kind of see how they do.
Yeah.
I think I probably would have stayed mainly in the actual crypto itself. Whereas, you know, because I was denied that option, I essentially went heavy into Coinbase and MicroStrategy because I had to, and because of that, I then had to kind of like learn more about them and actually kind of like realized that it's opened up kind of the opportunities, the crypto opportunities that are there. You know, yes, there's huge opportunities in crypto, but there's also huge opportunities in the companies as well. And I wouldn't have known that otherwise. So sometimes limits are a good thing.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I mean,
thing to say.
you ended up better off in the end, I think, because of those limitations. It's proving to be forcing you into a you know, a better investment strategy than I think a lot of us are in. Part of me wishes I would have been forced to do the same thing, because I didn't really give any consideration to anything outside of crypto. I was I'm fully crypto native. That's all I care about. That's all I want to care about. You know, it's just easy. I get it. But you know, sure, looking back now at the performance that these assets have had that you're in, I think that, you know, good on you. And I guess you could argue good on the UK for sort of forcing you to do this to some degree. Without opening a can of worms there.
Not really. Like, you know, the UK kind of like is kind of the adoption of crypto in the UK is not really as far forward as I would like. So, you know, I would like that to change. And obviously have access to the ETFs and all that kind of stuff and things. So, because, you know, ultimately, like, a lot of people would still like access to the ETFs. I would still like access to the ETFs in terms of traditional accounts and things, because ultimately there's still CEOs and management teams and all that kind of stuff with the companies. So there might be huge opportunities, but there's still those things to think about. Whereas, you know, the crypto token is kind of, well, there's other things to consider. But again, it'll still be nice to have the choice. But that's a choice, having learned through the limits of this cycle, that I would then be able to take forward into the future cycles, essentially. But yeah, like I think for the UK, the choice is really, if you're just looking for pure gains and nothing else, then kind of, I've had this conversation a few times on the Discord as well, just stick it all into ISAs. Don't bother with kind of like the crypto or all that kind of stuff. The question then becomes is, how much do you want to hold in kind of like the traditional finance portfolios and ISAs and tax-free accounts and all that kind of stuff, and how much do you want to self-custody? That's basically the option between the two. If you're not if you're just looking for number go up and you're just interested in the pure gains, just stick with the ISAs, because all of that is tax-free. Whereas if you want to have some self-custody, that's kind of like the option that we have in the UK.
it's crazy here. I feel like here in the US, this setup just completely slipped under the radar of regulators. But strangely, there's mechanism. You can buy a self-directed, Roth IRA here and fully custody all of your native crypto and go and trade on Coinbase and store it in your ledger. And it's 100% within the container of this IRA. Your broker doesn't touch anything. You basically just like hand them a report at the end of the year. Here's all the activity I did. Here's all my trades. It's all on my ledger. Thanks. And that's it. And I'm like, how can we do this here? But yet literally everybody else is being sued by the SEC for, breathing wrong, and somehow we have this weird freedom to do this. It just kind of doesn't make any sense. But yeah, anyway, I know you got a hard out in a few minutes here, so we should.
We've pretty much covered everything in terms of everything to update about MicroStrategy. It's definitely going to be like an interesting thing moving to look at moving forward and to monitor. So yeah, it's good to do the update and good to open the conversation up a little bit as well into a few other areas.
Yeah, that was great. We'll have to kind of keep this rolling and revisit that here before too long and see where things are at. But yeah, no, glad we did this.
Yep.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, and I suppose quick question: the recent puke and crash that's happened, are you worried?
In a word, no.
Neither am I. Good.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think we can leave it at that. Yeah, we've talked about it plenty offline and outside of this one, other shows and stuff. But yeah, no, I think it's fine. I think it's a blip on the radar. Perhaps a pretty ugly blip, but yeah, that's about it. So yeah,
they're all painful. It's like, I like the analogy of when markets puke, because like, in real life, when you puke, you have that sort of painful period beforehand where you're like, it's coming, then you do it and it's even more painful, but then afterwards you are like so much better. And it's the same with the crypto markets. We see these pukes down, but then those create the conditions to really rocket up afterwards. So again, it's nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Right on. Well, all right. I'll stop the recording and yeah, let's right on.
Yeah. Until next time.
Thanks for coming. Yes. Until next time.